This program was made possible by grants from the Hawaii Committee for the Humanities and the Catholic Communication Campaign.
Woman of hope. She was able to face the challenges of her day, and I don't believe we can really appreciate what those challenges were.
Hopefully we'll have her canonized. It'd be nice if the two of them were canonized together, Damien and Marianne, because she really took over his work.
Her life is a saint Christian life, and that she could be put as an example for faithful for humanity.
Mother was very wonderful.
It was Mother Marianne who brought the programs of Father Damien to fruition.
It was 1883 when a dedicated woman led a small group of Franciscan sisters halfway around the world to the island of Molokai in the Kingdom of Hawaii. They came to care for patients with leprosy, people no one else wanted to touch. The woman who led this group was Mother Marianne. Mother Marianne was a young girl when she felt her first call to religious life, but she was 24 years old before she was free to join the Franciscan order. She first saw Franciscans in Utica, New York, where she grew up. 4 sisters came to teach at a local parish school, and the sight of them and their habits strengthened Mother Marianne's desire to answer the call to service. In August of 1862, she entered St. Francis Convent. Shortly thereafter, Mother Marianne was named superior of the first hospital in Syracuse, St. Joseph's. Here she introduced new concepts of sanitation that were just beginning in Europe. She was so skillful at preparing medicines, many people thought she was a professional druggist. In 1877, Mother Marianne was also elected head of the Franciscan community of Syracuse. She led the Franciscans with skill and devotion. Then she received a letter which changed her life. Father Leonor Fusnel wrote to her seeking sisters to work in Hawaii's hospitals. He begged for her help, adding that surprisingly, the Protestant king of Hawaii had asked for Catholic sisters, and it would be a great loss for the Catholic mission to miss this opportunity. Mother Marianne wrote back immediately.
Shall I regard your kind invitation to join you in your missionary labors as coming from God? This is a question that has been constantly on my mind. My interest is awakened, and I feel an irresistible force drawing me to follow this call.
When Father Leonor first wrote to Mother Marianne, he painted a glowing picture of the Hawaiian Islands. However, he didn't mention the fact that he was searching for nurses to work with patients with leprosy, a disease that at that time filled most people with fear and horror. When he finally came to visit Mother Marianne in Syracuse, he told her he was seeking help for these unfortunate patients. In telling her the truth, he won her heart for the cause. At that time, most of Hawaii's rulers were Protestant, and Catholics received very little public support. That's why Hawaii's Bishop Herman could hardly believe it when the Prime Minister approached him with the idea of inviting Catholic sisters to care for the leprosy patients. Prime Minister Walter Murray Gibson wasn't trusted by many people. He seemed to have his fingers everywhere. That's why people called him the Minister of Everything. One of his ventures was a Honolulu newspaper in which he wrote an article that had a profound influence on the future of the Catholic Church in Hawaii. He printed a plea in his newspaper saying that if a Christian priest or sister would sacrifice their life to console the poor leprosy patients at Kalaupapa on the island of Molokai, theirs would be a royal soul which would shine forever. The bishop met with his priest to discuss Gibson's appeal. Several volunteered to go, but the bishop shared most people's dread of the disease and was hesitant to assign anyone to a permanent station in the settlement. He did agree, though, to send a succession of priests to serve for short terms of about 3 months. The man who volunteered to go first was Father Damien de Voister, a young, dedicated priest from Belgium who was eager for the work. Father Damien landed at Kalaupapa on May 10th of 1873. 2 days later, he wrote to his superior in Honolulu, saying the sick were arriving by boatloads and dying in droves. He wanted to devote the rest of his life to the leprosy patients. After Mother Marianne thought about the plight of the patients and Father Leonor's plea, she wrote back saying,
I am hungry for the work, and I wish with all my heart to be one of the chosen ones, whose privilege it will be to sacrifice themselves for the salvation of the souls of the poor islanders. I am not afraid of any disease.
She selected 6 sisters to go with her. They naturally had some fear of the disease, but Mother Marianne assured them that none of them would ever contract leprosy if they followed her precautions, and none ever did. The sisters left Syracuse on October 22nd of 1883. It was a strenuous journey over land and sea. Mother Marianne expected to establish the mission in Hawaii and come back to the mother house in a short time, but she never returned. At that time, the only effective treatment for leprosy was segregation. Those with the disease were removed from the rest of the community and sent to Kalaupapa, one of the most isolated places in the Kingdom of Hawaii. Steep sea cliffs separated Kalaupapa from the rest of Molokai. The other 3 sides of the peninsula were surrounded by treacherous seas. It was virtually a prison for those who were sent there.
If you go back during the early history, the lifespan here was said to be anywhere from 6 months to a year, because it was always told to anyone that came here, once you get here, this is your last stop. After that, there's no hope of going anyplace else. People here, when I first came without the cell phone, were dying like 2 to 3 people a day. At least, if not every day, every other day. And it's not something that you like to think about, but you went to a funeral almost every week, or every other day, or sometimes every day. I remember when I first landed here, the first day I got here, there was 3 funerals in 3 different churches.
I don't think there's one family been in Hawaii 2 generations or more that didn't lose somebody here. Not necessarily a relative, but a neighbor, a close friend, a classmate. In those days, you got it, you got dumped in here, and that was it, period. Well, as you go along the road there, you see hundreds and hundreds of graves. For all the graves you see out there, maybe you only see 1 out of 35 or 40. Because there's so many of the old stories. Brother Dutton himself said when he came in, one of the first letters he wrote, said, I look out my window, and just in the corner I see over 3,000 graves. And of course, Dutton, that was about 1886. Well, right out there at the mouth of the valley, that's Waikolo. That's where the first patients were dropped off. They were not brought here to be cared for. They were brought here to take care of themselves. Waikolo was full of taro. They were supposed to live off the taro in that valley and the ocean, which, well, Hawaiians could do. The thing was, as I told you before, there were no trees on these cliffs. They had no firewood, nothing they could use to cook the taro with. So that's what made it bad. The taro was there. There's plenty of it. And there's plenty of fish, but nothing to cook it with. That's what made it such a miserable place. Now, if they came on a Hawaiian ship, they were lucky. The Hawaiian captains felt sorry for these people. These were their own people. And they took care of them as well as they could coming in from Honolulu. And in the mornings, they would anchor off here, offshore, and put them into small boats and row them into shore. But from the stories I got, several of these ships were foreign ships. These were people who'd come thousands of miles across the Pacific. By the time they got to Honolulu, they needed supplies, fresh supplies, desperately. And they were told by the Hawaiian chiefs, if you don't cooperate, you don't get any supplies in Hawaii. So these were the ones who handled the patients unwillingly. These were the ones who would keep them in cages on the bow of the ship. They would anchor offshore here and open the cages and beat them or prod them with clubs until they jumped over the side and swam into shore. It didn't happen very often, but once was too much. And I know it happened more than once.
When the sisters arrived in Honolulu, King Kalakaua and Queen Kapiolani visited them. The queen cried with gratitude for the sisters' willingness to come to the aid of her people. She, more than any other of the royal family, was worried about the alarming death rate among her people. Of all the diseases devastating the Hawaiians, leprosy was the most frightening. It had afflicted thousands, and no one knew how to cure it.
These medicine bottles especially were found here. See, they had nothing that worked for leprosy. They tried everything under the sun, all the patent medicines and everything. Of course, they were full of stuff like opium and alcohol and laudanum. They were painkillers. Can you imagine what was in something called Sanford's Radical Cure? Or Kickapoo oil? The great Dr. Kilmer's swamp root remedy. Kidney, liver, and bladder cure. It didn't do a damn thing for leprosy, but it killed the pain. The saddest thing to me, it wasn't getting sick, but getting your nose rubbed in it. Made to feel ashamed about being sick. That was the bad one. It's the same thing that's going to work with AIDS. It's going on with AIDS right now. When people are sick is when they need the attention. This is when they need somebody to show that they have faith in them and all.
The sisters' first assignment was Kaka'ako Hospital on Oahu. It was a dismal place with despondent patients filled with despair. The sisters had never seen such wretched conditions in their lives. They quickly descended upon the hospital, and the patients never again lived in such squalor. They had barely been there 2 months when Mother Marianne was asked to set up a new hospital on the island of Maui. Although already heavily burdened by her duties on Oahu, Mother Marianne felt that God had called her to take on the additional work. So she sailed for Maui. That year, a leprosy researcher in Hawaii, Dr. Edward Arning, told Mother Marianne about children who were living at the leprosy settlement at Kalaupapa. Even though it was a harsh policy to separate children from their families, Arning was sure that if they could be taken care of by healthy people, they would never contract leprosy. Mother Marianne decided to protect those children and asked Prime Minister Gibson to build a home for girls in the yard of the convent on Oahu. Gibson protested, saying she had enough to do, but she persisted. Finally, he asked the legislature for the funds. Queen Kapiolani appealed to the community for financial support, so Mother Marianne named the institution the Kapiolani Home for Girls. The home was dedicated in a colorful ceremony on November 9th of 1885. King Kalakaua decorated Mother Marianne with the Order of Kapiolani, which rewarded acts of benevolence to the Hawaiian people. 9 years later, the legislature created a formal policy of separating children from mothers and fathers who had leprosy. As soon as a baby was born in the settlement at Kalaupapa, the child was taken to Honolulu to be raised by the sisters or relatives. The Kapiolani home served this purpose for female children for 53 years. Mother Marianne made her first visit to the settlement at Kalaupapa in 1888. At that time, it was a barren and uninviting place. She also visited Father Damien, who was seriously ill with leprosy. Damien told her he had been begging God to send someone to carry on his work. He had long prayed that the sisters would be the ones to take his place at Kalaupapa when he was gone. She assured him that she would care for the boys and men after his death, as well as the girls and women already under her care. In November of 1888, Mother Marianne and Sisters Leopoldina and Vincent moved permanently to Kalaupapa to live and work among 1,000 patients. After a visit to Father Damien's boys' home, she said,
My heart bled for them, and I was anxious to help put a little more sunshine into their dreary lives.
6 months later, on the morning of April 15th, 1889, Father Damien died at the age of 49. In a letter to the Mother House, Mother Marianne wrote,
We visited him before he died, and standing at his bedside, one could imagine the voice of God calling him to come to his reward. His was a grand and noble life of self-sacrifice. How closely he followed in the footsteps of our loving Savior, living and dying for the poor outcasts. What more can a poor mortal do than give his life for his fellow creatures?
Mother Marianne fulfilled her promise to Father Damien and took over supervision of the boys' home he had started.
Father Damien had many ideas, but he didn't live to put them into fruition. And it was during her time at Molokai that she was running the girls' home when he died. And it was during her time that the boys' home, which he had begun, was built up. And so I believe that the two of them are really very special individuals who are role models for our present generation.
The year of Mother Marianne's arrival at Kalaupapa, Charles Bishop, husband of Princess Pauahi, donated money to build a home for women and girls. Mother Marianne took over supervision of the Bishop home as soon as she arrived. Although she nursed leprosy patients in Hawaii for 35 years, her name isn't well known, largely because she shunned publicity. But her presence was essential to the success of the work at Kalaupapa. She helped bring peace and order to the settlement, as well as dignity and purpose to the lives of the patients.
As I talk with all the sisters, and as I have gone back to Molokai, and as we make more and more progress in the work of bringing about her canonization, I think the sisters see her as this very dedicated follower of Francis, and a person who over 100 years ago then really saw the gospel message. She saw Francis as following Christ in the Gospels and Christ going out to the people, and that's what Mother Marianne did.
One distinguished person who visited the settlement to pay his respects was Robert Louis Stevenson. Soon after he arrived, Stevenson composed a poem for Mother Marianne.
To see the infinite pity of this place, the mangled limb, the devastated face, the innocent sufferers smiling at the rod, a fool were tempted to deny his God. He sees and shrinks, but if he look again, lo, beauty springing from the breast of pain. He marks the sisters on the painful shores, and even a fool is silent and adores.
Mother Marianne was quite ill during many of the years she lived at Kalaupapa, but she worked as long as she was physically able and refused to submit to old age. She continued to be an influential presence until her death in 1918. The cause for Mother Marianne was established in 1976 to begin the process of canonization to declare her a saint.
It'd be nice if the two of them were canonized together, Damien and Marianne, because she really took over his work, you know.
100 years after Mother Marianne's arrival on Molokai, the people of Kalaupapa gathered together for a special Thanksgiving Mass to commemorate her memory.
Let us pray that our lives in this sacrifice...
Bishop Ferrario from Honolulu conducted the celebration.
This morning we brought to a completion the part of the canonization process that takes place in the locale where the beginnings were made. And a tribunal has been working for 5 to 8 years gathering documentation, information about the life of Mother Marianne to find out whether indeed it was an heroic life, charity, faith, and love. And these documents now will be brought to Rome.
After this happening of today here in Molokai, I am conveying to Rome all the documentation being collected by the tribunal, and a French author says that a family without history is a family without honor. Well, in these 27 volumes, I am conveying to Rome a history of Hawaii, the honor of Hawaii. The beatification is just to put for humanity these examples who had lived Christian spirituality in so high heroic level. We have a little saint in us, but this saint, this courage, should explode only when we have other persons. In Italy we have an adage. We say, when another one has given me an example how to do it, I could be a lion to do the same. This is the meaning for the humanity of beatification.
Father Piagentini is the official postulator. He is the one that does all the constant driving work. And he will present it to the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. And the first thing they will do is try to verify it. Once it is verified, then the next step is to achieve the decision that Mother Marianne is beatified. And besides all the documentation, they look for the occurrence of a bona fide miracle through her intercession. And that would be the second step. And then the third step is the final canonization, when they have proof of another miracle, and they then would be able to canonize her officially in Rome.
Mother Marianne's courage and dedication have touched the lives of many, even years after her death.
Well, I had entered the convent having read The Life of Mother Marianne by V.J. Jacks. I think the book was out. It was Mother Marianne of Molokai, and it was written in 1934. Well, I know that having read the book, I was just so inspired that that's all I wanted to do. But as I said, I had to wait a long time to get here. But it was well worth waiting for.
Came to the islands in 1912 and went to Capellari home. While I was there, the children of the Capellari home got a free passage to Molokai to give the parents up there a chance to see their children. Some of them have not seen their babies since they were born. So they lined them up one by one. There were quite a number. And each one stood up and they called out the name. And then the mother of that child came forward, but she could not touch them. She went back to her place, and then the next child would be called. And that way, they got their first glimpse of their children.
Many years ago, when I was a teenager, I read the first biography of Mother Marianne by L.V. Jacks. And at that time, I was impressed with her extraordinary courage and heroic charity. It really impressed me how a woman who had such rare executive ability, was the head of the hospital, was provincial mother of her community, would leave everything and go over to an island where there were, I found out from research, at least 1,200 leprosy patients. And more than that, I found out from reading the biography that she was the inspiration to the other sisters.
Sister Leopoldina, remembering her days with Mother Marianne, wrote in her journal, "Mother was wonderful. One could not leave her presence without feeling the sweet, peaceful influence of her grand, noble spirit. It was not what she would say, for her words were few, but just her presence seemed to fill one's weary heart with new life and strengthen the fainting spirit so that one could go cheerfully on through the dark shadows of the painful part of life. I often wondered if Mother ever suffered with those dreary, dark shadows, for at all times she was the same, with a smile and a pleasant, encouraging word." It was not until the 1940s that a cure for leprosy was discovered, and 30 years later that the isolation policy was abandoned. Kalaupapa was declared a National Historical Park by President Jimmy Carter, and today it is no longer the comfortless prison it was when Mother Marianne arrived.
I feel that this is a very special place. There's something there that we can't recognize. This, I guess, could be because of the hundreds, in fact, the thousands that ended up here. But the hundreds that ended up as patients out at Kalawao when life was so miserable, where you sat and waited to die, no hope of ever leaving. Even your relatives were turned against you because of the stigma of leprosy and everything else. And I think of the unnecessary suffering. It's one thing to get sick, but the unnecessary suffering because of the stigma, people, your own relatives were driven away from you, and your family taken away, or you taken away from your family. I feel that, well, I don't know how to express it really, but I've heard that Gettysburg and a lot of other places are like that, places where a lot of people suffered. You see that place on Iwo Jima, where all those Japanese soldiers committed suicide, they say that has the same feeling. It's like something hanging there, something that's not quite satisfied. It's got a sad history behind it. But then they can understand that the human spirit is something special. It shows that people will survive. No matter how bad things get, people can survive.
Perhaps the continuing miracle of Mother Marianne's life is that Kalaupapa is now a beautiful refuge and monument to human dignity, where we can still hear her hymn of sacrifice, her song of exile.